The West knew his name, a whisper of lead and legend, but the fastest gunslinger carried a shadow heavier than any holster. Every sunrise brought the same cold dread, a spectral chill that clung to his very soul, for his last duel was not with flesh and blood, it was with his sister's ghost. Witness the unraveling of a legend. Subscribe now. The sun, a relentless, unforgiving eye in the vast, indifferent sky, beat down upon the dusty main street of another forgotten town, illuminating the solitary figure who walked with the quiet, almost predatory grace of a man accustomed to the edge of life and death. He was a legend, whispered in the hushed tones of saloons and feared in the desolate canyons. His name synonymous with the lightning flash of steel and the chilling finality of a single precise shot that always found its mark. Every settlement he rode into held its collective breath. Every eye followed his measured, deliberate steps, recognizing the fastest gunslinger in the West, a man whose formidable reputation preceded him like a chilling wind. Yet beneath the hardened exterior, a different, far more insidious battle raged, one unseen by the awe-struck crowds who only perceived the myth. His hands, quick as a viper's strike and steady as a surgeon's, were scarred not just from countless draws and the recoil of his iron, but from a deeper, invisible wound that throbbed with a persistent phantom ache, a torment that no amount of raw whiskey or hard-won victory could ever truly numb or erase. The immense weight of his legend was a heavy, suffocating cloak, shielding him from the immediate dangers of the world, but simultaneously trapping him within a desolate prison of his own making, a gilded cage of solitude built meticulously upon the countless graves of those he had faced and, more painfully, the single irreplaceable grave of the one he had failed to protect, whose memory now haunted his every waking moment and invaded his restless dreams. He sought a desperate solace in the endless, sprawling horizon, riding tirelessly from one sun-baked, forgotten outpost to the next, hoping against all reason that the sheer, overwhelming expanse of the land could somehow swallow the persistent spectre that clung relentlessly to his periphery, a chilling shadow that danced just beyond the reach of his vision, always present, always accusing. Each brutal sunset painted the vast sky with hues of blood and profound regret, mirroring the tumultuous turmoil within his very soul, a canvas of sorrow that stretched as far as the eye could see, yet offered no genuine escape from the relentless, chilling pursuit of his own haunted memories, which clung to him like a second skin. The first subtle signs of her presence had been initially dismissed as mere fatigue, the inevitable strain of a life lived precariously on the razor's edge of a blade, or perhaps a trick of light in a flickering, smoky lamp, or merely the innocent rustle of dry leaves in an otherwise empty room. But the unsettling feeling grew with each passing day, manifesting as a cold spot in the warmth of a roaring campfire, a fleeting glimpse of a familiar silhouette in the periphery of his vision, or a mournful melody hummed on the wind that only he recognized from a childhood long buried beneath layers of grit and gunpowder. It was an undeniable presence, chilling and pervasive, a silent accusation that began to chip away at the very foundations of his formidable resolve, leaving him utterly exposed and vulnerable. He tried desperately to rationalize it, to attribute the increasingly unsettling occurrences to the profound loneliness of the endless trail, the lingering, debilitating effects of old, unhealed wounds, or the simple, creeping madness that often claimed men who walked his solitary, violent path. But the truth, cold and unyielding as a winter wind, began to settle deep in his bones. This was no ordinary haunting, no random spirit seeking vengeance or peace. This was something intimately tied to his very being, an unbreakable tether to a past he desperately wished to sever, yet found himself inexplicably bound to, a chain forged in the crucible of shared laughter and unspoken, broken promises. The fastest gunslinger in the West, a man who had stared down death countless times without so much as a flinch, now found himself facing an adversary against whom his legendary speed was utterly useless, a foe that existed entirely beyond the realm of bullets and bravado, beyond the reach of any earthly weapon. The chilling realization dawned upon him, a truth that settled like a heavy shroud over his weary shoulders, pressing down with an unbearable weight. His last duel, the one that would truly define his fate and determine his ultimate peace, was not with a living soul, but with the spectral echo of a love he could never reclaim, a duel that had already begun in the silent, tormented chambers of his own heart, a battle he was destined to fight alone. The dust, an omnipresent, choking companion in the vast, unforgiving landscape of the West, now seemed to carry her voice. A faint, almost imperceptible murmur that would rise with the wind and settle around him like a chilling shroud, wrapping him in an ethereal embrace. It was never a clear word, never a distinct phrase he could grasp, but rather a profound resonance, a familiar cadence that plucked at the deepest strings of his memory, stirring a profound, aching sorrow deep within his chest. A constant, unbearable reminder of the innocent laughter that had once filled his world and now existed only as a spectral echo in the desolate, empty expanse. He would turn, quick as ever, his hand instinctively hovering over his holster, but find only the empty horizon, mocking his desperate, futile search. He tried desperately to outrun it, pushing his horse until its flanks foamed with exertion, riding through sun-baked, scorching days and star-dusted, chilling nights, seeking a remote corner of the world where her spectral presence could not possibly follow, a sanctuary from the relentless, personal haunting that had become his constant companion. But the faster he rode, the more pervasive and undeniable her essence became, manifesting as the faint, sweet scent of wildflowers in the arid air, a fleeting shadow cast by a non-existent sun, or a sudden, piercing chill that cut through the thickest coat, even in the height of summer, proving with cruel certainty that some spectres were not bound by distance or the mundane laws of the living, but by the unbreakable, eternal bonds of the heart. The saloons, once a temporary welcome escape into the cacophony of human noise and the numbing embrace of cheap liquor, now offered no true refuge from the creeping dread that had become his constant, unwelcome companion. Amidst the raucous laughter and the incessant clinking of glasses, he would catch a fleeting glimpse of her reflection in a polished bar top, a shimmering, ethereal image that vanished the very moment he blinked, leaving him with a cold, hollow knot of despair in his gut. A feeling of profound loss. The tinny music, once a welcome distraction, now seemed to carry the mournful, haunting strains of a lullaby he had long forgotten, a melody that twisted his insides with a bittersweet agony, cruelly reminding him of a simpler, happier time that was now irrevocably lost to the mists of memory. Sleep, once a welcome oblivion and a brief respite from his waking torment, became a treacherous, nightmarish landscape where her translucent form coalesced from the deepest shadows, her eyes, filled with an unreadable, profound sorrow, staring directly into his very soul, stripping him bare. He would wake in a cold, clammy sweat, the phantom touch of her hand on his cheek lingering, the faint scent of her hair still fresh in the air, blurring the fragile lines between dream and waking nightmare, leaving him utterly disoriented and terrified. The nights were long and unforgiving, each one a descent into a deeper layer of his personal purgatory, where the boundaries of reality frayed and the spectral world asserted its undeniable, terrifying claim over his tormented mind, leaving him utterly exhausted and broken. His legendary composure, once as unyielding as the granite peaks, began to crack. The steely gaze that had intimidated countless foes now held a haunted, distant quality. His movements, though still swift and precise, carried an underlying tremor, a subtle hesitation that only he could perceive, a sign of his internal unraveling. The men who once feared him now watched him with a mixture of pity and profound unease, sensing the unseen battle he waged, the silent torment that gnawed relentlessly at his formidable strength, slowly transforming the fastest gunslinger into a man consumed by an invisible, relentless enemy, a mere shadow of his former self, adrift in a vast, turbulent sea of his own making. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a mournful, heart-wrenching sigh that seemed to emanate from the very air he breathed, a lament that spoke of unfinished business, of a bond severed too soon, of a love that refused to be forgotten by the cruel hand of death. He knew then, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in his bones and permeated his very being, that this was no mere haunting, no random apparition seeking attention. This was his sister, returned from the Vale, and she was not there to simply observe, but to demand a final, agonizing confrontation, a duel that would strip him bare of his legend and force him to face the unbearable truth he had so desperately tried to bury. The time for running was irrevocably over, and the true reckoning was about to begin, a battle for his very soul. The spectral presence, once a fleeting, elusive shadow, now solidified into an undeniable, terrifying form, her outline shimmering like heat haze over the parched desert, yet undeniably there, her eyes, though lacking pupils, holding a profound, bottomless sorrow that pierced him to his very core, leaving him breathless. She moved with an ethereal, unsettling grace, passing effortlessly through solid walls and closed doors. Yet her touch, when it came, was a cold, searing brand that left no mark on his skin, but etched itself deep into the very fabric of his soul. A constant, agonizing reminder of her inescapable reality, a torment he could not outrun, no matter how fast he drew or rode. His guns, once his only solace, his ultimate defense and the very extension of his will, now felt like useless, heavy weights at his hips, utterly impotent against an adversary that defied the fundamental laws of the living world, an enemy that could not be killed. He tried desperately to draw, to aim, to fire, but his hands trembled uncontrollably, his vision blurred with unshed tears, and the bullets, when they finally left the barrel, passed harmlessly through her translucent, shimmering form, leaving only a faint ripple in the air where she stood, mocking his earthly power, highlighting the profound futility of his legendary skill against the supernatural force that had claimed him. The bitter taste of futility filled his mouth, a constant reminder of his powerlessness. The duel was not fought with lead and gunpowder, with the thunderous roar of a colt, but with memory and profound regret, each spectral appearance a fresh, agonizing wound, each silent, knowing gaze, a question he could not answer, a silent accusation that echoed the deepest, most primal fears of his heart, twisting his insides. She would appear in the quietest moments, when his guard was down, when the world was still and silent, her chilling presence filling the room with an unbearable sorrow, forcing him to relive moments he had desperately tried to forget, twisting the knife of his guilt with every silent, knowing glance, leaving him utterly breathless and emotionally broken, a mere shell of his former self. His sanity, once as sharp and unwavering as his aim, began to fray irrevocably at the edges, the constant, unseen battle eroding his formidable will, blurring the fragile lines between reality and the spectral plane, plunging him into a terrifying limbo. He spoke to her, pleaded with her, cursed her name, but no sound escaped her translucent lips, only that silent, sorrowful gaze that spoke volumes, a language of pain and longing that only he could understand, driving him further and further into the depths of his own tormented mind, isolating him completely from the world he once commanded with such effortless authority and unyielding confidence. The townsfolk, once reverent and awestruck by his legendary prowess, now whispered of his encroaching madness, of the haunted, distant look in his eyes, of the way he would sometimes flinch violently from unseen presences or speak to the empty air, confirming their growing suspicions that the fastest gunslinger had finally broken under the relentless, unbearable pressure of his own dark legend. They avoided his gaze, crossed the street to avoid his path, leaving him utterly alone with his spectral tormentor. A pariah in the very world he had once dominated, his formidable reputation now reduced to a tragic tale of a man consumed by his own personal demons. He knew then, with a chilling, undeniable certainty that settled deep in his bones, that this was not a haunting to be merely endured, a torment to be suffered in silence, but a final, inescapable confrontation, a duel that would demand far more than his legendary speed or his unwavering courage in the face of death. This was a battle for his very soul, a profound reckoning with the deepest, most agonizing wounds of his past, and he understood, with a profound and melancholic acceptance, that he could not win this duel by fighting, but perhaps, just perhaps, by finally surrendering to the unbearable truth that his sister's ghost had come to reveal. His fate was sealed, and the final, agonizing act was upon him. The profound realization settled upon him like the heavy, suffocating dust after a long, arduous ride, a melancholic and undeniable acceptance that this spectral duel was not a punishment to be evaded or a torment to be outrun, but a necessary reckoning, a final, agonizing confrontation with the unbearable truth he had so desperately tried to bury beneath layers of lead and the weight of his own legend. He stopped running, stopped fighting the unseen, and instead turned to face the silent, sorrowful gaze of his sister, allowing her chilling presence to wash over him, a cold, relentless tide of memory and profound regret that threatened to drown him in its depths, yet paradoxically offered a strange, unsettling clarity he had never known. He began to revisit the memories, not as fleeting, painful glimpses that he quickly pushed away, but as vivid, agonizing replays, each one a shard of glass in his heart, meticulously revealing the moments leading up to her departure, the unspoken words that lingered in the air, the missed opportunities that haunted him, the subtle, cruel shifts in fate that had led to her untimely passage beyond the veil, leaving him alone. He saw her innocent laughter, heard her voice carried on the wind, felt the warmth of her small hand in his, and with each agonizing recollection, the crushing weight of his guilt grew heavier, a suffocating burden that threatened to buckle his formidable frame, yet he welcomed it, for it brought her closer, if only in his tormented mind. The gun belt, once an extension of his very being, a symbol of his power and identity, now felt alien. A useless weight, a stark symbol of a life he no longer truly inhabited, a life of external battles that paled in comparison to the internal spiritual war that raged within his very soul. He laid it carefully aside, the polished leather and cold steel, a stark contrast to the ethereal presence that now occupied his every waking moment, understanding with a profound clarity that this duel required no weapons of man, no swift draws or precise shots, but rather an open, vulnerable heart and a willingness to confront the deepest, most agonizing truths of his existence, a complete surrender to the inevitable, to the pain he had so long avoided. He sought out the quiet, desolate places, the ancient mesas and forgotten canyons, where the echoes of the past seemed to linger most powerfully, inviting her presence, no longer fearing the chilling touch that accompanied her arrival, but embracing it as a final, desperate connection to the one person who truly understood the broken pieces of his soul, the one who could offer him a path to peace. The wind whispered ancient secrets through the gnarled rocks, and he listened intently, not for threats or warnings, but for the silent language of her sorrow, seeking a path to understanding, a fragile bridge across the chasm of death that had so cruelly separated them, a bridge to absolution. The ghost, once a terrifying, tormenting apparition, began to transform subtly in his perception, her sorrowful gaze now seeming to hold a profound plea, a silent yearning for resolution, for a final, shared moment of peace, rather than just an accusation of his failures. He saw not just the spectre of his overwhelming guilt, but the enduring, unbreakable love that had bound them from childhood, a bond that death itself could not sever, a connection that transcended the physical world and pulled him inexorably towards a confrontation that promised either ultimate destruction or a fragile, hard-won absolution, a glimmer of hope in the vast darkness. The fastest gunslinger in the West, stripped bare of his bravado and his legendary speed, stood on the precipice of his true final duel, not against an enemy he could outdraw or outsmart, but against the spectral embodiment of his own profound grief and the enduring, overwhelming love for his sister. The stage was set, not in a dusty street at high noon, but in the desolate, echoing chambers of his heart, under the indifferent gaze of the endless sky, and he knew, with a chilling, undeniable certainty, that this was the moment of truth, the final, agonizing confrontation that would either free his tormented soul or condemn him to an eternity of haunting. The end was near, and the world held its breath, awaiting the outcome of this most personal of battles. The air around him grew heavy, thick with the earthy scent of rain on dry earth and the overwhelming, undeniable presence of her, a palpable sorrow that pressed in on him from all sides. Yet paradoxically, within its profound depths, he felt a strange, unsettling calm settle over his weary spirit. She stood before him, not as a terrifying, vengeful apparition, but as the sister he remembered from his earliest, most cherished memories, her form translucent, shimmering like moonlight on water, yet her essence, her very spirit, was undeniably whole. Her eyes, once filled with unreadable sorrow, now holding a glimmer of something akin to understanding, a silent, profound invitation to a final, desperate communion, a last goodbye. He reached out a trembling hand, not in fear or self-defense, but in a yearning born of years of unspoken grief, a silent, desperate plea for connection across the impossible divide that separated their worlds, and though his fingers passed harmlessly through her ethereal form, he felt a profound warmth, a deep resonance that vibrated through his very being, a touch not of flesh, but of soul, bridging the vast chasm between their worlds for a fleeting, agonizing moment. It was a connection that transcended the physical, a silent conversation of hearts that spoke volumes without a single uttered word, a final, desperate embrace that healed wounds deeper than any bullet. The duel was not fought with bullets or the thunder of a six-shooter, but with tears, with the raw, unvarnished truth of his profound regret, with the silent confession of his perceived failures, and with the enduring, unbreakable love that had bound them from the innocence of childhood. He poured out his heart, a torrent of unspoken apologies and desperate pleas for forgiveness, and in her silent, knowing gaze he saw not condemnation or anger, but a profound, melancholic understanding, a shared sorrow that transcended the boundaries of life and death, washing over him like a cleansing rain, easing the unbearable burden he had carried for so long, a weight that had threatened to crush him. Her spectral form seemed to shimmer, to soften, to become less defined, as if the immense weight of her own unresolved sorrow was finally lifting, replaced by a fragile, nascent peace, a quiet acceptance that settled around them both like a gentle shroud, a silent benediction. He saw a faint, almost imperceptible smile touch her translucent lips, a fleeting glimpse of the pure joy that had once defined her, a silent gesture of absolution that broke the invisible chains of his torment, freeing him from the relentless grip of his past, allowing a fragile ray of hope to finally pierce the profound darkness that had consumed him for so long. The wind stirred, carrying her essence away, not in a sudden violent departure, but in a slow, graceful fading, like mist dissolving with the first rays of the morning sun, leaving behind not emptiness or despair, but a profound sense of peace, a quiet understanding that the duel was truly over, the battle won, not with force or violence, but with surrender, with the courage to face the deepest, most agonizing wounds of his heart. She was gone, truly gone, but this time her departure left not a gaping void, but a quiet, enduring warmth, a promise of healing that had finally begun, a new chapter. The fastest gunslinger in the West, no longer haunted by the spectre of his past, stood utterly alone under the vast, indifferent sky, his legendary speed now a forgotten relic, his heart, though still scarred by the trials he had endured, finally at peace. Forever changed by the spectral duel that had stripped him bare and rebuilt him anew from the ashes of his former self. The West had seen his legend, but only he knew the true agonizing cost of his last fight, a battle fought not for glory or fame, but for the salvation of his own tormented soul, a story that demanded to be heard, a journey that had only just begun.